Most people recharge by being around others. You recharge by getting away from them. And for your entire life, someone has been trying to fix that. Here's what they got wrong, and what's actually happening inside you. By the end of this video, you're going to walk away with a few things. A real explanation of what your brain is actually doing when you're in a room full of people. Why being alone feels completely different for you than it does for everyone else. The 4 labels that get slapped onto this pattern and miss what's really going on. And one specific question you can ask yourself to figure out whether your alone time is working for you or whether something else is going on underneath it. 3 things to hold on to as we go. First, people who prefer being alone are not processing less than other people. A lot of the time, they're processing more. That's exactly why they need the quiet. Second, there's a real difference between choosing to be alone and hiding by being alone. From the outside, those 2 things look identical. From the inside, they feel nothing alike. Telling them apart matters more than anything else in this video. We'll get there. And third, there's a part of the brain called the default mode network. What it does in people like you completely changes what being alone even means. We'll come back to that. Let's build it. Start with what's actually happening when you walk into a room. A dinner party isn't one thing coming at you. It's dozens of things all at once. Faces shifting every fraction of a second. Tone of voice carrying a whole second layer of meaning underneath the actual words. Who's deferring to who? What's being implied but not said? What's being avoided? Background noise? The clink of glasses? The conversation at the other end of the table you can half hear. And running through all of it, like a process you can't switch off. How am I being seen right now? For most people, all of that runs quietly in the background. They don't really notice it. They can track every signal in the room and still have brain power left over for the actual conversation in front of them. Some brains don't work like that. Some brains take in more of it, in sharper detail. The face shifts, register more clearly. The subtext gets decoded more thoroughly. The background noise doesn't fade out the way it does for other people. You're not picking up things other people miss because you're smarter. You're picking them up because your system is tuned to a different setting. This isn't a flaw, it's a calibration difference. A researcher named Elaine Aron has been studying this for decades. She calls it sensory processing sensitivity, and her work shows it's a real, stable trait in about 15 to 20% of the population. It shows up in other species too, not just humans, which tells you something important. It isn't some modern glitch. It's a normal variation in how nervous systems get built. Some have it, some don't. If you've spent your life feeling like everyone else is operating with a thicker skin between them and the world, this is probably why. If you've ever wondered why everyone else can shrug things off that stay with you for hours, this is the answer, and it gets sharper from here. Here's the next piece. Some brains have a higher baseline activation level. That's the technical phrase. In plain English, they're running closer to full before anything has even happened. Imagine 2 phones. One's at 30% battery and barely doing anything. The other one is at 90% and running heavy apps in the background. Now you open the same demanding app on both. The first one barely notices. The second one heats up almost immediately. That's roughly what's happening when 2 different people walk into the same dinner party. One of them arrives with a lot of room left in the system. The other one arrives already most of the way to capacity. The room doesn't have to do much before that second person hits the limit. This isn't weakness. This isn't being too sensitive, although you've probably been told you are, more than once. It's just that you started further along. The same input that's nothing to someone else is a lot to you because of where you began, not because of something wrong with you. So your brain takes in more signal. It runs hotter to start with, and then a few hours of social input pile up on top of that. What do you think happens next? Anything that runs hot needs to cool down? Your laptop after a long video call? Your phone after you've been using maps with the screen on full brightness in the sun? The engine of a car after a long drive? These aren't broken systems. They're systems that did a lot of work and need a minute before they're ready for more. Your brain is the same. When you come home from 3 hours at a dinner party, a good dinner party with people you actually like, where nothing went wrong, and you need to lie on the floor in silence for an hour before you can speak again, that's not sadness. That's not avoidance. That's not you being antisocial or depressed or any of the other things people have tried to make it mean. That's recovery. That's a system cooling down so it can run properly again. The problem isn't the cooldown. The problem is that from the outside, the cooldown looks like a problem. It looks like you didn't have fun. It looks like you're shutting people out. It looks like something to fix. And so the people in your life, meaning, well, mostly, keep trying to fix it. Push yourself more, get out more. Don't isolate. You should really come to this thing on Saturday, but you didn't need fixing. You needed cooling. Most of the friction in your life around this isn't coming from the pattern itself. It's coming from the gap between what the pattern looks like and what it actually is. If you've ever been told you just need to get out more, this next part is the specific reason that advice misses the point completely. So far, we've only talked about what happens when input is coming in. What about when it stops? When the room goes quiet? When the dinner party ends? When you close the door behind you and you're alone? For a lot of people, when the outside stuff drops away, the inside feels kind of empty. Boring. The world was making noise, and now it isn't, and they don't have much going on internally to fill the silence. So they reach for the next thing. Phone, TV, someone to text, something to put on in the background. That is not what happens in your brain. There's a network of regions in your brain called the default mode network. The name is a little misleading, because default mode makes it sound like it's the brain on standby. It isn't. The default mode network is what lights up when your attention turns inward instead of outward. It's the system that runs when you're thinking, remembering, daydreaming, working a problem out in your head, connecting one idea to another, replaying a conversation, planning, imagining. It's the brain talking to itself and doing real work while it does. Research has found that in people who lean more introspective, more inward, more solitude preferring, this network runs more actively, more connected, generating more. This is the part everyone external to you keeps missing. For your brain, being alone isn't the absence of stimulation. It's a different source of it. The signal doesn't stop when the room goes quiet. It moves inside. Ideas start clicking. Something you read 3 days ago suddenly makes sense. A problem you'd been chewing on works itself out while you're doing the dishes. The conversation you needed to think through gets thought through. That's not nothing. That's not empty. That's the system doing what it's actually designed for. If your inside is that busy, of course you don't need the outside to be constant. You've got a signal source that travels with you. It doesn't need other people to switch it on. It doesn't need a room full of noise to feel alive. When you understand that, the whole preference for solitude thing stops being mysterious. It's not that you don't want stimulation. It's that you're already getting it. You're running on a source other people can't see. Now, I want to do something direct. There are 4 labels that get put on this pattern. By other people. Sometimes by doctors. Sometimes by the person themselves. They get used interchangeably, like they're all describing the same thing. They're not. They're not even close. The first one is introversion. This one is actually the right word, but the popular version of it is shallow. Most people hear introvert and they think shy, quiet, awkward at parties. That's not what introversion is. Introversion is what we've just been describing. A nervous system that takes in more signal, runs at higher arousal, and recovers in low stimulation environments. It's not a personality type, it's a wiring profile. The label isn't wrong, the explanation behind it usually is. The second one is social anxiety. This is a completely different mechanism. Social anxiety is your threat detection system. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala that handles fear responses. firing because social situations feel dangerous. Someone with social anxiety doesn't prefer being alone because it's restorative. They prefer it because being around people feels like a threat they're trying to escape. The relief of being alone in that case isn't satisfaction. It's the relief of getting out of something scary. These two things can show up in the same person, but they're not the same thing. And treating one like the other gets you nowhere. The third one is depression. This one matters. Depression can pull someone away from people in a way that looks exactly like solitude preference from the outside. Same behavior. The difference is what it feels like on the inside. With a real solitude preference, the time alone feels good. The system is doing what it's good at. With depression, nothing feels like anything, including the solitude. The person isn't alone because it feels right. They're alone because nothing feels like much of anything anymore. If you genuinely can't tell which one is true for you, that uncertainty itself is signal worth paying attention to. Talk to someone. The fourth one is avoidant attachment. This is when closeness with other people creates an unconscious pull to back away. Distance gets used to manage the discomfort that connection brings up. It can look like solitude preference. It runs on completely different fuel. Someone with a real solitude preference can have deep, lasting relationships. They just need to manage the dose. Someone running an avoidant pattern is using distance to keep something at arm's length. The thing being kept at arm's length is intimacy itself. Two different things, even when they look the same. Here's why this matters. And it isn't academic. If you've been applying the wrong label to yourself, you've been trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, and probably missing the one that does. This is the part most people stop watching because what comes next names something they've been doing for years without seeing it. Which brings me to the thing I said we'd come back to. The way to tell for you whether your time alone is healthy or whether something else is going on. It's not the amount. The thing that separates a real solitude preference from problematic hiding isn't how much time you spend alone. It isn't whether you turn down invitations. It isn't whether you live alone, eat alone, work alone, or have a smaller social circle than other people. None of that tells you anything reliable. The question is this: does your solitude feel chosen, or does it feel like the only option? Real solitude preference has a specific feeling to it. There's a sense of agency going into it, like you picked this, like there was a menu and you chose the quiet evening and the choice was real. The time alone actually restores you. And you can move back toward people when you want to, not by forcing yourself through a wall of dread, but because you genuinely feel like it. Hiding feels different. The relief comes, yes, but it curdles. A low background anxiety stays even in the quiet. The dread of the next invitation. The guilt for canceling. The way the world starts to feel smaller in a way that doesn't quite feel like freedom, even though it looks like freedom from the outside. You can have both running at once. You can have a real preference for solitude and a fear-driven avoidance pattern sitting on top of it. They're not opposites. They can stack, but they have different leverage points. The preference doesn't need fixing. The fear does. Here's a practical way to test it for yourself. When you cancel a plan or turn down an invitation, what does the moment right after feel like? If it feels like exhaling, like a system returning to a state it works well in, that's probably the preference. If it's relief that starts to curdle into something heavier, that brings a low hum of anxiety into the quiet, that makes the solitude feel less like a choice and more like a requirement, that's a different system running. That one's worth looking at more carefully. Let me close the loops I opened at the start. The claim that people who prefer being alone are processing more, not less. You've got the mechanism for that now. Higher sensitivity, higher baseline arousal, a default mode network that generates real signal from the inside. The quiet isn't empty. The quiet is where the processing actually happens. The difference between choosing solitude and hiding in it, that's the question we just walked through. Agency and restoration on one side, escape and narrowing on the other. You now have a way to tell. And the default mode network, the reason being alone means something different for your brain is that the inside isn't blank. It's a real source of signal. Being alone for this kind of system isn't absence, it's access. Here's the line I want you to keep. Your nervous system isn't broken. It's tuned for a different signal. The problem was never the preference. The problem was the misreading of it, by other people and sometimes by you. That isn't permission to avoid your life. It's a more accurate read on your own system. And a more accurate read is the only place you can actually start from. If you want to go deeper, the next piece worth understanding is how reward actually works in this kind of brain. Specifically, how dopamine, the chemistry behind motivation and pleasure, behaves differently in high arousal nervous systems, and what that means for the kinds of things that genuinely satisfy you versus the kinds of things you're constantly being told should satisfy you. That video is on this channel. If what we've covered here has been useful, the reason to subscribe isn't to support me. It's that understanding how your own system actually works is the only leverage point that holds up over time. Everything else is guesswork, and you've already been guessing about yourself for long enough.